Living my bucolic life, free, healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello everybody, welcome back. This week we're going to be making a really cool dress. At least I hope it's going to be really cool. I am going to be using a Vogue vintage reprint pattern. It's going to be this one here, okay? And it's the shorter version that I'm going to be making. Now, in the description for this dress, they call it a tent style dress, which, you know, gives all kinds of panic, makes you think it's going to be ginormous. And there is a huge amount of ease worked into this. So this dress is ultimately going to belong to my mother, but her size is close enough to mine that, you know, I'm going to just try it on and everything for you at the end, so hopefully we'll get this to work out. But what I wanted to point out is that I am going to be doing the size 16, cutting it out. Even though if I use the actual measurements, they would be wanting me to use like a size 20-ish, okay? But because there is so much ease worked into this, and I just don't want it to be ginormous, going with the size 16 I think is going to be perfect. So what I want you to do if you're going to do this is pay very close attention to your actual measurements and then make your best judgment at that point. I would suggest going smaller, but that's just me. I haven't made it up yet. The fabric that I'm going to be using is a stretch velvet. It is this fabulous burnt rust, orangey rust kind of color. Okay, isn't that fabulous? And it's a stretch velvet. This is a 𝐃𝐸 Textiles one I bought, and they ship it out pretty well. So I'm happy about that. So on this pattern, it has, you know, the princess seams and everything, but the big defining feature of it is it has this big cape on the back, which is really neat, the cape works as sleeves and, you know, a really cool feature in the back. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it out off camera. Because I am using a nap fabric, it's really important if you're going to, that you always keep everything the same direction. So make a note of which side is up and make sure that is the up side of all of your pattern pieces. And I'll show you later how the different naps can look like different colors. But let me go ahead, get it cut out. It's a huge piece of fabric, big pattern pieces, and then I'll show you what we have to work with. Okay, so I cut out my pattern, and on the front, they have these inseam pockets in the very front, and I am going to be omitting those. I just don't want to deal with all of that, you know. I want to keep that front line as smooth as possible. So I am actually going to be cutting these little parts of the pattern that stick out. I'm going to cut those off so I can omit those pockets. All right, so there's two pieces to deal with. There's a side front with it sticking out here and the center front. I'm going to do the same thing for both. Move this out of the way up here, which is basically, I'm going to put my ruler on the cutting line here, okay? Just draw that line in like that. That's going to be my new cutting line, and I'm just going to take that whole pocket piece out, and I'm going to do the exact same thing onto this piece. Just put my ruler, Put my ruler along the cutting line here, draw a line and cut this little piece off. You know, it's my personal preference, but I think that that will be a good choice for this dress. Okay, so I've got it cut out with the exception of the belt. I'm thinking that because I'm making a smaller size and it's not going to be as big and blousy, that I don't actually need the belt, you know? We will see. If I get to the end and it looks like it needs one, I can always add some because I have plenty of fabric left over. One thing I would mention, the fabrics that this calls for, it says crisp fabrics, soft fabrics, crepe de chine, challis, wool crepe, whatever. It does not say stretch, all right? I am making the executive decision to use this. So because mine is a stretch, and it's, you know, it's a sturdy stretch, it's not going to get out of shape or anything like that. But because mine is a stretch, I am not going to put the back zipper in. I'm not going to need it because I'll be able to pull this over the head really easily. So between omitting the pockets, omitting the zipper, this should actually go together fairly quickly, with the understanding that I am using a tricky fabric, but you know, that's life. Turning it this way, this blends in. This is actually placed on it the same direction that this is, okay? It looks like the same fabric and everything. If I take this fabric and I turn it upside down, when I place it next to this, actually from the angle that I am sitting at, it's a lot more dramatic than on the camera. You have to take my word for it, but it's going to look like a totally different shade of fabric, okay? So that's why it's really important that when you are placing your pieces to cut them out, you know that all of the tops are all up here. Okay, my camera's like going into a really strange lighting mode. I don't know what it is, sorry about that. But it's important that all of your, when you're using a nap fabric, okay, that all of your top pieces are all going the same direction, okay? Because if you like flip that one upside down, you're going to end up with panels that look like different fabrics. So let's go ahead and see what they're going to want us to do to get started. Oh, the other thing is, since this is basically a knit, I don't have to worry about it unraveling, you know, so I'm not going to be serging all the edges. I do need to put a brand new ballpoint needle into my machine, so I'm going to go ahead and run over and do that right now. Hello everybody, welcome back. So it's actually been a few days and I'm ready to get started sewing this dress, and I want to talk about a couple things really quickly. Ooh, I'm crooked, fix that. A couple things really quickly while I'm getting my whole sewing room set up, because this is a specialty fabric. It is a stretch, it does have a nap and everything. What I have done is I've set up my sewing machine with a number 9, a small needle, ballpoint needle, and you know, I've got its thread and everything going on over there. But what I have done, and what I would highly recommend if you're using a odd fabric, an unfamiliar fabric, is play with it for a while. I just took a scrap and played with it. If I use a straight stitch and I stretch it as I go, how does the machine react? If I don't stretch it, how does it react? If I pull it, instead of stretching it this way, lengthwise, if I pull it and stretch it widthwise as I stitch it, how will it react, you know? And figure out what's going to work best for you and for your machine, so that when you actually start on your garment, you can be doing it the way that everybody is happy together. And not only that, but also do a zigzag if you're using a zigzag machine, and make sure that your tension is right, because you know, weird fabrics do wonky things with tension. And make sure that it looks good front and back. Make sure everything is balanced before you even get started sewing on your other fabric. It'll save you a lot of headache. And I think the other thing that I was going to mention is these are really, really big pieces, especially that cape piece and everything. And if you're working on a table or something where you have more fabric space, you have more fabric than table space, when you're working on a specialty stretch fabric, it's really important that while you're cutting your pieces out, your fabric is not being stretched. And if you let your fabric dangle over the edges, that part that's over the edge is going to, you know, just gravity and everything, cause the fabric to stretch a little bit, so that then when you put it back up on the flat surface, it's going to come together and it won't be right. So just be very careful that while you're cutting things out, that absolutely none of the fabric that you're pinning your pattern pieces to is stretched at all. If you have to kind of bunch your fabric up around the edges of the table just to make sure that happens, that's better than the option of having it stretch while you're cutting it out. So with all of that being said, let me go ahead and tip the camera down and we'll get started putting this together. Alrighty, so I'm going to start out with the back piece. Now on the instructions, they are putting a zipper in. Like I said before, I am not. So this will be the abbreviated version, so instead of worrying about putting a zipper in, I'm just going to sew the straight seam down the center back. What I would recommend, because, you know, nap, stretch, all that kind of stuff, is always sew your seams starting at the top and working your way down. So for my center back, I'm going to do that. For my side seam, there's like 2 panels, there's a princess seam. So starting all of those at the top and working my way down, I should be able to come up with a much more uniform type of a look if I do that. So I'm just gonna try not to move my fabric too much. I'm not actually gonna put in any of these dots or anything in the center back because I don't need those. Those are pertaining to the zipper. So I'm just gonna match this up, stitch it at 5/8 of an inch, and then I am going to lightly press it open with my steam iron, and I'll show you the way that I'm going to do that. Okay, I've got it stitched. I'm over here at my ironing board. I'm going to show you the way that I'm going to be ironing this is basically the hover and pat, my hover and pat method. So this part up here I just did. Right here I'm just going to be like maybe 1/2 inch or so above it. I'm not actually touching the fabric. I am putting a bunch of steam onto it. Move my iron and with my hands pat it down, okay? I think that that is going to be enough for this particular fabric to make it really want to lay nice and flat. So once I get that done, the outside then is not going to have any marks on it or anything. It's going to be lovely. And this will lay nice and flat. So let me finish up the back seam. Okay, so with this center back seam done, I'm going to set that aside for a second, and I need to get my side front piece. Now there are several dots on here that I do need to transfer over because it's going to have to do with matching up all kinds of things. So big thick piece of leather underneath the tissue paper and punching out the circles that go along with my size. And I'm going to be using one of my heat erasable pens. This one is black. And I can just stick my little pen through the hole I punched. I think that my ink is dry. There it goes. Okay, and just draw my little mark through that hole. I need to mark these on the wrong side of the fabric for both sides. In addition to the little circles, there are also notches to be cut. In my opinion, not terribly critical because there is not a sleeve here. It's a stretch band that we're going to be putting around the armhole. So I'm not worrying too much about this little notch here, and shoulder seam is shoulder seam. It's more the dots that are going to be really important. Okay, so with those marks put on, we are going to sew the side back to the back piece. So if this is my back here, I'm going to put one little part up. What we're going to be matching up is the whole side and the shoulder. And so I'm just going to take one of these. Okay. And get it placed up here. I want to make sure that at the notch on the top will help with matching this up, but you want to make sure that at 5/8 of an inch, your edges are matching up. So if it looks like that, that's okay, because at this point right here, that's where your stitching line is going to be. And then down here at the side, you can tell this is very finicky fabric here. Okay, matching up this side seam here. I'm going to pin it all the way down. Both of these are going to be at 5/8 of an inch. And then pressed open, you know, with my little steam, hover, and pat kind of method to open it up into one big panel. Okay, so I've got that done, you know, pressed open and everything. And what I need to do now is work on the little armhole facing. Now on the instructions, they're going to have you cut this, where's that line? Here it is, on a bias. If you're using a woven, you have to cut it on a bias, because that's the only way you're going to get any kind of stretch out of it. Since I'm using a stretch fabric anyway, and my layout was a little wonky, I actually cut it on the straight, but you know what? I still have stretch, so I'm okay. So what I need to do is take these two pieces, and you can notice I'm not getting too stressed out about marking them right here. I'm going to fold it in half, like this, and stitch it here at 5/8 of an inch, and then press that seam allowance open so I have a little circle. Now looking at the pattern piece, you can see if I fold it exactly in half here, there's the big circles at the very top. That's going to match up with my shoulder seam, okay, up at the very top, so I know what that is. These circles here, after I get this seam allowance pressed open, I'm going to come back and mark these little circles. Those are the ones that are going to match up with these dots that I drew on earlier. Okay, so I will get it placed correctly, don't worry about that, but first thing I need to go ahead and sew these into little loops and press them open. Okay, so now that I have it pressed open, I need to fold this in half, wrong sides together, this way. And again, once I have it completely folded in half, press it like this. So I have my little strip here. After I folded it in half, I stitched it at 1/4 inch seam allowance and pressed it again. And these pins are marking where this dot is. It's just easier for me to do it that way. So what I need to do now is turn this right side out, like this, and I'm going to match up my bottom seam with the cut edge of my little band and the cut edge of my garment, matching up. I'm going to pin on both sides of this seam allowance to keep those little folds sticking out flat, because I want them to stay pressed open. Okay, so now for the top, I'm going to find that center top point on my band, the center top of my shoulder. Okay, put those raw edges together here, and once again, pin both sides with that seam allowance open. So now, like on this side, you can see that dot right there, and this pin is pretty much lined up with it, so not a whole lot to have to work in there. I'm just going to lock it in. And up here you can see there is some stretch that's going to need to get worked in, like so. Okay, I don't like the feel of that. Even though this pen is here, I'm actually going to even it out just a little bit. Okay, anyway, I need to go ahead and get this matched up, pinned up, and stitched at 5/8 of an inch all the way around. All right, so I want to show you something I did just to make everything fit easier. This looks like a pretty snug armhole anyway, and it is going to be underneath the cape, so no one's going to be staring, you know, at your armpit or anything. What I did is I just lowered this bottom edge about 1/4 inch down. Okay, so here's the cut edge of the dress, here's the cut edge of the band, just so that it's going to fit better. Okay, so I can just kind of average it out here, so that's going to fit a lot better. And when I stitch it, I'm going to stitch it 5/8 of an inch from the band edge down, not from the garment edge down, okay? Right now what we get to do is trim. All right, we are going to trim this now. So if you can see, here is my stitching line. You can kind of see it on that side better than this side. I'm going to trim it to probably about halfway, so that I end up with only about a narrow 1/4 inch-ish type seam allowance in here. So that it looks more like this, okay, than this. So I'm going to basically take off about half of the seam allowance. Let me go ahead and trim that off of both arms. Okay, so now that everything is trimmed, I need to understitch it. So I'm going to pull the folded edge out here so it's sticking out and it is over the top of my seam allowances. And then I'm going to need to run a row of straight stitches on the little band side over all of the seam allowances, so it locks it in this way. So this side I've already done. So you can see I have a row of stitching right in here, and on the back side it's kind of hard to see because I have such a short and very thick seam allowance, so it's not actually laying perfectly, but it's close enough that it's going to do what it needs to do. I think that if, you know, I had this to do over again, it would be a lot cleaner and a lot neater to understitch it before I trim it. Because trimming something this fat, or with, you know, all of this nap and everything that short, and then trying to understitch it, it just has a life of its own and it goes everywhere. If I had left the full seam allowance, I could probably keep it a lot flatter and then come in and trim. But you know what? Life goes on. So once that is done, it's going to make it a lot easier to turn the whole thing to the inside, okay? But over here, that's what I'm going to do that understitching just like this, okay, on the band side. Okay, so what we're going to have to do is whip stitch it down. And I wanted to show you, this side I've already done, and you can kind of see the little dimples in there. But this is going to be hidden, you know? It's going to be underneath this flap, so that's fine. But I was just letting you know, in case you're thinking of omitting the flap and you're using a stretch velvet, well, the dimples show just a bit. But anyhow, the way that I'm doing it is, I'm just going to use a few clips. So first folding down at this bottom edge, put a clip down here, fold it up at the top edge, and since we understitch it, it's going to pull it everything towards the underneath, which is nice. Clip that, and about halfway, probably right around here, I'm going to put another clip. And then just with a needle and matching thread, you know, start down here and work myself all the way around. Hello everybody, welcome back. It's actually been a couple days again, but I wanted to try to jump back into this while it's a very snowy day outside. The next instruction is going to be to put like a stay tape up here around this neck edge, right around here to keep it from stretching out of shape. They say to use a stay tape. I'm going to use this 1/4 inch twill tape. It's very lightweight. I think that that will be good because it does not stretch, you know. This is a 𝐥𝐢𝐤𝐞 item. Love their stuff. So what they say to do is measure your pattern piece and use that measurement to cut your stay tape. So I want to show you how I do that. Okay. Let me see if they show on their pictures. They just say between the large dots. Okay, so what I do is, here is the large dot for my size. This is my side front piece, okay? Now I need to measure from that dot to 5/8 of an inch from the top. Okay, so I'm going to draw a line there. So from the center of this dot at approximately 5/8 of an inch in, okay, add a seam allowance in, up to this line is 4 7/8. Good morning and welcome to another day. So let me tell you what happened. I just got done showing you how pretty this stitching is, okay? And as soon as I turned off the camera, I flipped it over and I looked at this side and I had big puckers in the back. And I wasn't feeling my best yesterday, you know, trying to fight something that's going around, you know how that goes. And so I decided I'm not even going to deal with it until I feel better. So here I am feeling a little better. So what I did is I just picked off all of that stuff on the back, and I am going to just work it in and stitch it in by hand across the back, just in basting stitches, just to hold it together. Okay, so I've got it stitched back on by hand, kind of eased all that stuff in. This is very thick, so you can see every little ripple as I was easing it. This shouldn't be visible from the outside because we are going to have the cape over it, so I'm not too stressed about it. But I can say that if I was to do this again, at this point where I'm sewing, before I even sew the back together, what I would do is fuse some stay tape or put stay stitching at this neck edge here before you start doing, you know, this back seam, especially before you start with the zipper and everything, just so that your back doesn't stretch out of shape. I honestly still don't know. I might have just cut one of these sides slightly wider than the other. I don't even know. Cold medicine does weird things to your mind sometimes. But I'm just gonna call that good and move forward here. Okay, so the next step is actually working on this cape. And on the instructions, what they want you to do is reinforcement stitching 5/8 of an inch in around the corners here. After that fiasco I just had, I'm actually going to do reinforcement stitching all the way up, around, and back down, just because heavy, stretchy fabric, and I don't want this to get stretched out of shape. So at, let's see, do they say it? No, they don't. At 5/8 of an inch, I'm going to go ahead and stitch up, over, and back down. All right, so I'm looking at the wrong side of my fabric. I'm not sure if you can see I have a row of stitching in here at 5/8 of an inch. What they want you to do at this point is go ahead and clip. I have a tiny dot right there in my corner, which coincides with the dot on the pattern. I'm going to clip to, leaving about 1/8 of an inch between the end of my clip and that dot, so I can flex it out on these two corners. And then what they want you to do is hem the outside edge of this. And they want you to do just a little narrow hem. And so let me find the beginning right up here. They say turn it in a 1/16 of an inch and then another 1/16 of an inch, you know, like so. And then this is going to be stitched. You could use a machine and stitch it, but since this fabric is special, you know, and it reacts kind of special, I might just stitch this by hand, kind of an invisible kind of running stitch type of a thing along my edge on the, you know, more focusing on the wrong side. So I just pick up a thread or so from the right side and just do that all the way around. This is a long process, but I wanted to show you what I do. This is actually, it's a clip from a quilting frame that I have in the other room. But you can use a clip with a weight on it or something. But what I do is, because this is a stretch fabric, I want to hand stitch it while it's somewhat under tension, so that when I make my stitches, my thread won't be puckering it together. So if I put my little weighted clip here, and as I get further along, I can, you know, dangle it over the edge of my table. Okay, so if it's on here, just the weight of this clip alone is fairly heavy enough to put tension here. Then I can turn my little fabrics as I go. Put a little clip here, okay? And then as I sew it, let me lift this one up here. So if I have it lifted, then boom, here, as I'm stitching, it's gonna have a nice taut, you know, it's not super stretched, but it's a nice taut fabric, so that then I can just come back and I'm just catching like one little thread at a time, do a few rows or a few stitches and pull it through, okay? And then just keep going. And that honestly makes it so much easier to do hand stitching like this. And then when I go to put it down, it's going to lay nice and flat. My stitching's not going to pucker it in or anything like that, okay? So, and then as I go, you know, let this hang over the edge of the table or just keep moving it up, whatever works for you. And it doesn't have to be, you know, one of these. It can be just a regular clip of some kind with something heavy on it. And not terribly heavy. This thing, I don't know, it's maybe about 4 ounces or so. It's, you know, just a weight, but it's got a bungee on it. And I have done things that I need a super amount of tension on, and I've like anchored the bungee to things and all, but sometimes these are handy to have around. Okay, so I have my cape hemmed, and I want to show you, I've just pinned it onto my dress. You know, there's obviously supposed to be a front panel here, which is not there yet. But I want to show you the back, how it drapes down. I think that that's really pretty, you know, especially this fabric. I'm just loving this fabric. And there's 3 dots here on the front, and you match those up with the little cape. The very bottom edge of the cape here matches up with one of the dots here, and you know, and then so on and so forth. And that little angle in the cape that we were reinforcing, that matches up with the shoulder seam. The one thing I can tell you is, remember I was having trouble working a whole bunch of ease into this little back section? I think I might have cut that twill tape short. I think I might have measured incorrectly or something, because even this is not fitting. I mean, it looks a little bit puckerish. So I think what I'm going to do, and I'll show you, I'll go back down to the table. I am going to cut that twill tape, open it up so that this is going to lay flat and that's going to lay flat. I think that that's going to be a lot better. But I just wanted to show you how it's matching up right now. So of course there is going to be a front part here that starts like right about here and comes all the way down. And we need to finish around the neckline and everything. But I think it's going to be amazing. Okay, so I've just went through with my little scissors and clipped off several of those stitches so I can pull it out. So what I need to do is find the exact midpoint of this cape section. So I'm just going to fold it in half, matching up my little corners here, edge to edge, which is going to give me the midpoint right here, and match that up with that center seam right here. Get that pinned together, and the one layer does have stay stitching on it, my cape layer, so I'm going to call that good for reinforcement for while I'm working right here. So if I just lay this down and match it up, I think that's going to go pretty well. I am going to go ahead and overlay this twill tape over that, so when I do sew it at the 5/8 of an inch, you know, it will do a little bit more for reinforcing. But you'll be able to see that for some reason I cut it too short. So how I was measuring earlier might not be the best. Might not be the best. All right, so look at that. I have about 1.5 inches short, you know? It is what it is. I'm not going to worry about it too much here. Actually, I have an issue right there. Okay. So now that that is all pinned together, it's going to lay a lot nicer on the outside. I'm going to go ahead and, it says to baste it. I'm actually going to machine stitch it, but I'm going to do it at about 1/4 inch in, 1/4 inch seam allowance, all the way around. Okay, let me tell you what I did. After I machine basted it on at about 1/4 inch, and I had to change needles, if you can see. Look at that. I was skipping a bunch of needles, and I had put a number 9 ballpoint needle in there earlier, which seemed to be good, but then it stopped working. So I just switched it over to a universal size 11, and that seems to be working better now. You know, it just changed its mind what it wanted to work with, so that's okay. But anyway, so I ended up doing that twice. What I did in the back, instead of messing with that twill tape again, is I just got a piece of my 1-inch wide tricot tape, fusible tricot tape, and I just ironed that on. So with hindsight and everything, what I would do if I was to do this again is on both the dress part and the cape part, I would have used my fusible stay tape all the way around the back and the front area and just skipped the twill tape part altogether. I think that would have done it. This tricot would work fine for that, something just to keep it from stretching out of shape. And I think that that would have worked just fine, but you know what, where we are right now, it's good, it's good. And you can see when I was stitching it, it got a little bit out of sorts there, but that's okay. That's only about 1/8 of an inch different in my seam allowance. That's my 5/8, so we're gonna be okay. Using a napped fabric, it just necessarily, when you squish it together, it's gonna wanna go like that, which can be troublesome. So what I need to do now is just set this piece aside, get my center front piece out, and we're gonna work on the top part of that. So up here at the top, there are fold lines marked. The fold line for my size is gonna be right here. I'm gonna mark that in a minute after we get the first part of this done. And what they're going to want you to do is, looking at the wrong side of it, I grabbed their instructions here. Okay, they're going to want you to stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance straight across here, which is going to kind of work like stay stitching at this point, I'm thinking. And then once that is done, they're going to want you to fold it under and give it a nice whip stitch. All right, before I do anything else, I have my 1/4 inch line in there. I need to measure how far my fold line is from the cut edge. And it looks like it is 1 3/4 inches. Okay, so I'm gonna come in here, put my ruler at the 1 3/4 inch point. All right, that looks pretty close. I'm gonna go ahead and just, with my heat erasable pen on the wrong side of my fabric, draw in where that fold line is, okay? So that is there now. Now, what the instructions tell you that they want you to do is, once you've put your stitching line at a 1/4 inch, then they say trim it down to 1/8 of an inch and overcast it. I'm gonna go back to my serger and just run a serged edge here and just trim off 1/8 of an inch. That's gonna do the exact same thing. Okay, so I think that that's going to be just fine. It does what they needed me to do. And they want you to get a piece of seam binding. And I have an old piece of orange seam binding. This shouldn't show, so I'm just going to use this. And it's basically a stay tape kind of thing that is 1/2 inch wide. Okay, so if you don't have seam binding, a lightweight ribbon might work. And I need to place it along that fold line. So let me go ahead and clip off the length I need here. Stick a couple pins, and I'm going to edge stitch it along this side and this side. So I have 2 rows of stitching coming all the way down. All right, so I've got it stitched on here. And what I need to do is fold it. Again, I'm looking at my wrong side here. Now this is the right side of my fabric. Fold it along that fold line, just below this stitching line on my self-facing. I'm going to press that, and then I need to turn this little raw edge under here, press that, and then just very invisibly stitch straight across here to hold that facing nice and neat like this. Okay, I want to show you, I think I said that wrong. This bottom part here, on their instructions, it looks like they're just leaving it like this, okay? Which I could do. If I iron this out flat, I could do that. But what I'm gonna need to do, because I don't want to stitch right here all the way through the fabric, because on the right side, I want this to be nice and smooth, okay? but I need to come down here on both sides and stitch that in. I'm going to do that at about a 1/2 inch seam allowance on each side right here, and that's just going to tack this whole part down. I'm going to go ahead and just do my hovering steaming kind of thing here. Sorry about that on the camera. And just leave this flat like that. I think that that's going to be fine. All right, so here is my centerpiece I just did. Okay, it's right side up. And I'm going to take my dress, and remember there was 3 dots here. Okay, 1, 2, 3. At this one up here where we started that twill tape stuff, that is going to match up with the very top fold over here, okay? So here is that dot. It's lining up right there. All right. There is a second dot here that's going to line up with a dot on my center front piece, and a 3rd dot down below, okay? And also I'm going to come down here and match up the bottom corners, which it should come together really well, and it looks like it will. That's great. Okay, so let me get all of this matched up. I'm going to be stitching this entire way down from, oh my goodness, making sure everything stays folded as it should. Up here, all the way down, you know, starting at the top and working down, so we're doing the right direction here, at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so now that that is done, here's my seam I just made. To press this open, what we're going to have to do is move everything out of the way here. All right, up here at the top, where it's in the exposed neckline area, all of this is going towards the side seam, okay, towards the arm area. But right underneath where this little front facing is, that's where we're going to start to press it open. So this front center area, I'm just going to clip right there. Okay, so let me go ahead. Lots of layers right here, and just right here, that's off to the side, but then below that, it's coming open, okay? If that makes any sense like that. And then I'm going to press this open the rest of the way down and do that on both sides up here. All right, so I've got my dress set aside for a minute, and I'm getting my neck facing piece here. There's a lot of things I'm going to need to mark, but I'm just going to set that aside for one moment because I need to fold this wrong sides together, and I am going to give it a quick press just so it's going to want to stay there, and then come back and machine baste it along this edge, probably at about between 1/2 inch and 3/8 of an inch, you know. So I've got that done. I'm just going to put some pins here at certain spots. So at center back, okay, at the large dot here, and here at this smaller dot. The small dot's going to line up with our shoulder seam, and the larger dot is going to come down and match up where we just put that front facing piece. All right, so I've got the back of my dress here. This is the cape part that we're looking at. So the first thing I'm going to do is match up the raw edges of my band here at center back with this one, and put a pin right there. The trickiest part of this is going to be this shoulder area, because that's where we have this little corner. Okay, so I want to be really careful and make sure that corner stays where it needs to be so that I don't have a hole visible on the right side. And I might, let's see here, if I put this pin at the stitching line, will I be able to see that hole? No, I won't. So I think I'm good there, okay? You want to make sure that on the raw edge of your band that you can see right here is where that little cut is to that reinforced corner, that the entire thing is up here above your stitching line, okay? So let me just go ahead and pin everything in the middle here. Matching up right sides to right sides on that side, and the same over here. Making sure that the entire little corner is above where the stitching line is. So I'm going to put this pin down here, double check it. Yes, it is. Okay, call that good, and pin in between. We have a lot of thicknesses here, just letting you know. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, well, only 4, but since it's this very nappy stuff, it feels thicker, I think. I'm just going to put a couple more pins just to hold it. Okay, coming down here, this pin, which is this dot here, that should match up to, let me open this up this way, okay, the very top of this fold line here. So I'm going to place it so that pin is matching up with the top of that fold line. Right, pin that in place, and everything in between right here. Okay, and then down below it, remember where we had this part, the seam allowance was all pressed towards the neckline, or can't really tell that now, but trust me, it's all together here. I'm pinning to this point here. Okay, so I need to pin the other side like this. Once I get that done, I need to come back and stitch at 5/8 of an inch, which is going to be pretty close to the center of this band, all the way around. Okay, so I've got it sewed on. Before I can finish it off looking like this, there's going to be a whole lot of seam allowances I'm going to need to trim out, because that is a lot back there. So I am going to just see how much needs to be gone. Oops, just trimmed my thumbnail there. Okay, if I trim it off so I have like a fat 1/8 of an inch of seam allowance, I think that that's going to be good, and I can turn it under and whip stitch it like that. But what I wanted to show you is some of this previous stitching, and I think that this is from that stay stitching earlier. It's visible here, you know, because things got a little bit uneven. Sewing with velvet, it moves on its own. It's just the way things are. So what I'm going to do is pull out all of this stuff that's visible here. It's not really serving a purpose right now. It was just to keep everything from stretching out of shape while I was doing everything else. And technically, if everything lined up and my raw edges were perfectly level right here, none of this would be showing. But stretch velvet being what it is, that's just not the case. So I'll deal with that later. First thing I'm going to do is come in here. Well, no, first thing you do is make sure your corners look good. Okay, make sure that you don't have any problems going on at your shoulder seams where those corners are. And here's the other one, and that looks good. Okay, so now that I can double check that, I'm just going to go ahead and finish trimming off my seam allowance in here down to a fat 1/8 of an inch all the way around. So now that that is trimmed, here's my little edge that I just put on. I'm going to fold that all the way underneath, and I'll come back in from the inside here, and I'm going to whip stitch it, but I'm just catching the dress fabric. I want to keep this cape part separate over here so I'm not grabbing it at all. I want to make sure none of my little whip stitches go through to the cape. And just starting way up here in the front, right here, I know it's a jumbled mess right now, just whip stitching this edge down all the way around. Okay, so I have only one more thing to do, and that is to hem my dress. So I don't know if you can tell, it's a very, very slightly curved bottom, which shouldn't be a problem. what the instructions call for is a narrow hem, where you just turn it up a 1/4 inch and turn it up another 1/4 inch. And I'm debating on that because I really, really want my hem to look smooth, you know? I kind of like the look that it is right now on the outside, where there is absolutely no stitching there, but you know, we can't get away with that entirely. But I think that if I did turning it and turning it again, just because of the thickness of this fabric and everything, that would make a thicker hem than what I want. So what I'm going to do is get out some stretch lace. And I know that this doesn't match entirely. I have a bright orange stretch lace, and that was a little too shocking, so you know, it's going to be on the inside. I think it'll be okay. I'll do one more check in my box before I stitch it. But what I'm going to be doing is trimming off this little loose threads right here, is sewing it on this lace. It doesn't have a huge amount of stretch, but enough that it can give a bit. And there's 2 channels, one on each side, and I'm going to be sewing it by straight stitching inside this bottom channel here. I'm going to place it at the raw edge of my fabric so that the edge of the fabric is about halfway up the lace, okay? So I'm just going to go over to my machine and lay it down and do a straight stitch right there, and that stitch is going to be at about a 1/4 inch in. And the length that my dress is now is a great finished length for me, so I'm not going to worry about shortening it. And actually, I did let this sit on my dress form overnight, and that way I wanted to make sure if it was going to settle or not. Turns out this fabric is sturdy enough that nothing, you know, sunk. If it was a very lightweight knit, you know, sometimes fabrics grow. This one did not, so that's good. Again, if you're curious, this is one that I found on a website called 𝐃𝐸 Textiles, K-I-K-I Textiles, and just do a search on rust stretch velvet, and you should probably find it if you're curious. Okay, let me go ahead and get this sewn on, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I have my lace sewn on. Now here's the thing, if this was a very, very curved hem, like a circular hem or something, when I sewed my lace on, sorry, just ran upstairs. When I sewed my lace on, I would have stretched it as I sewed it so I could work in fullness, you know, at this point. Since this hem is fairly straight, I didn't have to do that. I just sewed it on as is, so not working any ease in there. But what I'm going to be doing is folding it up so that I have about 1/2 inch from the bottom edge of my lace to the folded edge here. Do my steamy, pressy kind of thing. Sorry about that in the camera there. And then just pin it every now and then. And I am going to be hand stitching this up once I'm all done pressing. Okay, so to get started sewing it, what I'm just using a single thread, single knotted thread, make sure that's set. I'm going to go ahead and start my thread underneath the seam allowance and then come up, and I'm going to be stitching it in this top channel of the lace up here. And I'm just going to kind of pick stitch it where I go down, pick about a thread, come back up, and then go up about a 1/4 inch and do the same thing. Over the seam allowances, I can be a little more gutsy here because I've got a thick layer of fabric. But once I get to the part without the seam allowance, which I'm going to do right here, I'm only going to try to pick one little spot, okay? Just enough to secure the tape to the fabric. And just do that all the way across, okay? So I'm just barely picking anything there. And I have stitches that are probably, you know, a fat 1/8 of an inch wide in between. So I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way around my tape. On the outside, yeah, there's going to be a slight dimpling visible, but it won't be as bad as it would have been otherwise. At least I don't think it will be. it. I think it's very comfortable. If I was to do this again, I would still use a stretch fabric. I think by omitting the zipper, it makes life so much easier. And I honestly don't think I needed pockets right here to get that smooth line. Omitting the pockets is fine with me too, you know? Especially with this fabric. And you can see it looks like several different shades here. And when the light hits it, however the light hits it, it changes the look of the fabric. But just before I put this on, I was doing a final press on it and I learned something. And I wanted to show you really quick. So on this, when I was ironing it, if I went like back and forth like this, it left a mark. I have to go back and iron from top to bottom. Just like when you're laying out a pattern, and you have to make sure your top is always on top, you have to iron this the same way, where you like start at the top and work your way down. And sorry, my cat's rubbing on the tripod thing. And I specifically left the back as it was so you can see, you know, it's not a tragedy because I can go back and iron it. But I don't know if you can see where there's a little bit of a mark where I was ironing from side to side. Well, when I take it back upstairs before I pack it up, I'll just iron it from top to bottom, even all of that out and everything, but I wanted to point that out to you. But all in all, it went together really well. I did a lot of hand work on this, hand hemming things, just because of the fabric, you know, and the way it is. If you were using a simpler fabric or something that you didn't, you know, care about being so precise for an event or something like that, yeah, you could machine stitch your hems. That's not a big deal. But anyway, that's it. Hope you liked it. It's a fabulous dress, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Living my bucolic life, 𝐥𝐢𝐤𝐤 city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Right barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.